You're listening to the Seahawks Insiders.
Geno looks, going to lay it up over the top. Got a man out there. It is locking. He has got it. Touchdown, Seahawks.
Getting you ready for Seahawks football every Sunday.
Hurts drops back, has time, loads up, throws. A.J. Brown, the defense. It's intercepted. Does he keep his feet in? He does. Seahawks ball.
Presented by Delta, the official airline of the Seahawks. Now, here's your host, Jen Mueller.
Well, a 2-0 start is exactly what you were hoping for from the Seahawks, and it certainly makes for a fun edition of the podcast, is it not, John Boyle?
Hey, as Nuke LaLoosh once said, I like winning. It's a lot better than losing.
Yes, in those infamous words
that's a
of
Bull
a
Durham
fictional
reference for
character,
anyone,
right?
Under the age of 40 or so.
And also, Bull Durham is baseball, and we're actually talking about football, John.
know,
so
but it's
I'm going to question just a
it's
little
a great
bit where
line.
we decided to go with that. But you're right. Winning is better than losing. And Mike McDaniel has now won both of his games as a head coach. Nobody else in Seahawks coaching history can say that.
I do believe the interim coach, Mike McCormick, when he took over, did that. There's been a...
my apologies.
I saw this all over
was
Twitter. It was a heated debate.
It was a heated debate. I missed out on this debate.
Because
really
I saw
sorry.
that all over Twitter that he's the first one to do it. And then others pointed out that when Mike McCormick took over, I want to say, did he follow Patera?
You know what I'm going to say, folks? I have
We're gonna do
covered the
some Seahawks
Seahawks for
history.
16 years, and it has not happened in those 16 years. So that's what I'm going
We
to
can
say.
say this.
for
The
that.
great Seahawks coaches you think of, Mike Holmgren, Chuck Knox, Pete Carroll, none of them did it. How about that?
How about that? Great. So we have already stepped into two topics that have nothing to do with today's discussion here. You know what, though? I do think it is worth revisiting last week's game in New England. I don't know that it played out the way that I expected, especially after seeing defense week one come out of the gate so strong. And it didn't feel like they had that same continuity to the point where Mike McDaniel at halftime actually called out the team and called out the defense publicly and said, look, we got to figure this out and communicate a lot better than what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, still a lot to like about the defense, but it was, we saw, give Jacoby Brissett a lot of credit. He was making things happen, avoiding that pass rush, kept finding Hunter Henry, who killed the Seahawks for a half, but then to their credit, they adjusted. He had one catch in the second half. We'll talk about the run game later, but there's other things to fix.
Well, yes. And look, you knew that New England was going to run the ball. And it's funny because in all the guys that I talked to after the game, and I asked about Hunter Henry and that game plan, and they kind of looked a little bit confused because that wasn't even on their radar. They were more interested in talking about the run game.
Yeah.
And here's what happened. When you know that you have a running back that can put up that many yards and they feed the running back the ball, they had 36 rushing plays. And as Reek Woolen said afterwards, it's really tough to make a game-changing play if you never put the ball in the air, more than dumping it off to your tight end or giving it to the running back out of the backfield.
Yeah, they had 3 receptions from receivers, I believe. So that part of the game, they took care of it. Like a few things got them, but overall, you look at the yardage, the first downs, still a lot of good things out of this defense, which the best part about this is they're 2-0 and still going through a lot of the growing that comes with a new coaching staff, with new schemes. That can be a tough adjustment, so that they're going through some of these issues on both sides of the ball, but 2-0, that's a pretty great place to be.
And you had a game-changing play on special teams.
Mm-hmm.
Do you buy the fact that it was just a gut feeling?
I mean, I'll
Julian Love
take him
saying-
at his word for that, just saying, hey, but it is funny. He's like, oh, I'm always on the other side, and I told Rashawn Jenkins switch sides. But hey.
Well, and that's what Reek had told me after the game. He goes, yeah. Julian just comes up and he says, I got a gut feeling. And Reek said, okay, let's just rush together. And we've seen Reek.
Yeah, he's great coming off the edge there.
Get there. And I thought he was going to be close to that one, too. And he was like, no, it's kind of part of the plan. Like, Julian saw something and we were just going.
Well, and as Julian even said, part of the reason he has a path to make that play is teams have to account for Reek off the edge. There's some teams where the edge guy's not going to get there, whatever. But he's so fast. We saw it 2 years ago in San Francisco when he got the block. They really have to account for that, and that left a little window for, as Julian jokes, luckily I'm skinny, so I could fit through it. So it worked out well.
It did
Big
indeed.
play.
It did indeed. And you were going to need all three phases of the game this week. We're going to dive into a few of the numbers. I think the headline that everybody is following with Miami. Look, there's a couple of things that you know off the top. Number one, you know that they are a prolific offense thanks to Mike McDaniel.
Yes.
And it is Tua Tagovailoa who has made headlines all week long and caused the most conversation around football.
Yeah, for unfortunate reasons with his concussion history. You know, we talked to actually Connor Williams, who was his center for the last couple of years, and you could really hear the concern from him yesterday of just, you know, this is obviously every injury in football is unfortunate. When we're talking about somebody's, you know, brain, it's scary stuff to see a guy go through what Tua has the last few years.
And the fact that he is now on IR and has 4 weeks, minimum 4 weeks to deal with this, I think that that's helpful. I also think that furthers the conversation in the sport about how to make the best decisions. Whatever that decision ends up to be, and I'm not going to weigh in on all the factors that he should be considering because that's just not my area of expertise. But we know that for right now, it is going to be Skyler Thompson who is making the start for the Dolphins. Perhaps not a household name. He has made starts both in the regular season and the playoffs, and he is a little bit different from what you could have expected with Tua.
Well, he's willing to keep the ball a little bit longer than Tua. Tua's he was playing really, really fast, and the ball comes out pretty quickly on time, on target. He's got the same ability to do those things, but I'd say the ability also to, if you add the extended play to that element, that's something that you have to take into account, probably more so than with Tua. Again, it's a tough because it's not a huge sample size to see. And it's been a long time. And you're talking about a couple years of growth from when he started last in a playoff game, being in the system. So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously every team wants to have their starting quarterback, but when you have a head coach like Mike McDaniel who runs that, you know, his version of the Shanahan scheme that he puts his own wrinkles on, and when you have the weapons they have, the Seahawks know, like, it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback. Obviously, if the guy's there and he's their backup quarterback, he's a capable guy. They wouldn't have him on the roster if he weren't. And with everything he has around him, you have to still be very worried about what that offense can do.
You know, you talk about Mike McDaniel and his scheme. It's interesting because there's a couple of names that come to mind. When you look at the roster construction of Miami, they have 8 of the top 10 players in the NFL this season, right? As rated by who's ever rating players, right? Most of those guys are on offense. That is second only to San Francisco. They've got 9 of those players, right? The records that they have broken or the numbers that they are putting up are absurd.
Yeah.
They led the league in total offense last year with just over 400 yards a game. They led the league in passing. They led the league in yards per carried. And that offensive line has done a pretty good job of protecting.
Yeah. I mean, there's just about everything you want an offense to be able to do, they've been able to do under Mike McDaniel. And that's, again, going back to the conversation about the quarterback. Like, it's scary no matter who's back there.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting to, right? Miami's broken 6 team records and 13 individual records. Most of those are coming on offense. So here's my bigger question. Is it because Mike McDaniel is so innovative, or is it because you have playmakers like Tyreek Hill and Waddle and your running back, whose name I mispronounce every single time because I have to think about it too hard? It's Etienne, by the way. Devon Etienne.
Got it.
Yeah, I have to pause.
To me, the
every
answer
time.
is yes. It's both. You can be the biggest football genius in the world, and if you don't got players out there. I mean, you ask Mike McDonald, everyone wants to call him this defensive genius, and he'll say, well, it's the players. Like, the scheme isn't rocket science. They have to execute it. And same thing on offense, same thing with the 49ers. They've got all this talent, but it doesn't matter how good the scheme is if it's married together. It helps to have great players. It helps to have a Tyreek Hill, but you need also, you need both sides of it is what I'm trying to get at in very poorly state.
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure out what my level of concern should be with Skyler Thompson starting on Sunday, right? Because everybody looks at that and goes, oh, this is easy. And I'm like, I don't know.
Well, I would say this to the fans who say this is easy. Go back and look at some Seahawks home games against backup quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And look, we're talking about different players, different coaching staff. Everything's changed. But my only point about that, other than to bring up horrible memories, is just say in this league, everybody's pretty darn good at what they're doing. Every coach is smart. Every player is capable, and just, the old cliche of any given Sunday. So you cannot look at, oh, this team's got its backup quarterback and chalk up the win. We've seen it too many times, both here and around the league, that teams step up and get the job done.
Well, and to get the job done, you are going to have to communicate at a really high level. Explosive plays are something that Miami just deals in every single game. I'll tell you the numbers in just a second, right after we hear from Mike McDonald on what needs to happen.
Yeah, well, you're at home, so you can't be, speaking in paragraphs out there. You got to be quick. You have to play with anticipation off the movement. Again, they do a great job. Like, you're not going to see the same pictures from week to week that you would on a normal offense. So they're going to dress it up. They're going to be, and it's all through in the lens of how do you create the angles, how do you set up the blocks, which they do as good a job as anybody in the league. And so you have to play with anticipation. Your calls can't be, crazy complicated. So we have to do as coaches, we have to help our guys out so they can go play fast.
Well, and you are going to need to stop those explosive plays. Here's a few numbers that stand out to me. Already this year, Miami has at least 3 plays of 39 yards or more, all of those going for touchdowns. Last week, they added 16 plays of at least 10 or more yards. Their 14 plays of 50-plus since the start of last year, far and away more than any other team in the league, which means that there's going to be some opportunities at the back end of this defense to make some plays.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about that because we have not seen the back end of this defense tested very much these first 2 weeks. Denver was content to check the ball down. New England was running the ball or throwing it to their tight end. So this is going to be by far the biggest test in terms of perimeter players, downfield shots, all that stuff that we've seen what looks to be a really good Seahawks secondary face this year.
What have we learned about tackling and being there? Because when I look at the missed tackle numbers, it surprised me a little bit. Yeah, because it doesn't feel like that when you watch the game.
Yeah, it did a little more in the New England. You saw some of them get out. I mean, obviously,
I would also say gassed.
Yeah,
right. I felt like the defense got gassed
a
little bit in the
second
half.
Field a lot. But yeah, the Denver game is interesting. When we talked to the defense coordinator, Adam Durde, during the week after that game, and Aaron's been talking all week about the tackling and how good it was. He's like, we actually missed quite a few. I think he said it was 9 or 10 missed tackles, which sounds bad, but his point is you can get away with a missed tackle if there's another guy right there and another guy right there, and you can go find some of those plays in the Denver game of the guy slips the initial tackle, but it doesn't matter because there's 2 guys right on top of him. Now, New England, it was a little tougher the way they had that physical run game going. They broke a few and extended them. The missed tackles hurt a little bit more, but it's going to be a big emphasis in this game. You don't, as explosive as they are, you can't be giving up anything extra.
Well, and I wonder if you see just a little bit more pressure put on the quarterback that is not as familiar, hasn't played a game in over a year, right?
Yeah.
Well, last week coming in for Tua, but their blitz rate is among the lowest in the league. Seahawks are blitzing just about 21% of the time. But if you look at their hurries, their quarterback hurries, hits, and pressures, they're in the top 6.
They're among the league leaders and everything. According to Next Gen Stats, Mafe has the most quarterback pressures and the highest pressure rate of any pass rusher. So they're getting the job done without necessarily committing. And part of that's what Mike McDaniel does. Is like, it's not a blitz because they might only send 4, but you don't know where those 4 are coming from. You might mug the line with 7, 8 guys, and the quarterback's got to figure out who's coming. And, no offense to Skyler Thompson, but Jacoby Brissett's seen a lot more football than he has. So, and this is something that Mike McDaniel talked about last week of like, we're not going to be able to trick Jacoby Brissett. He's seen a ton of football. Well, you kind of hope a younger guy, loud environment at Lumen Field, you might be able to get in his head a little bit. That's the hope.
Well, yeah, and you would hope that, by game 3, you start to see some continuity. I know Mike McDonald said, it's really game 4 and 5 that you start trusting some of those numbers. But despite the numbers that the Seahawks have allowed in the run game, the defensive line is coming together pretty nicely.
Well, we ask a lot of those guys on early downs to, we're not a big penetrating front. So, like, they have to play blocks. They have to stay square. They have to set up the second level for success. And then when we're able to take double teams off, that's when they make their hay on early down. So that's an unselfish job. And those guys they're doing a great job. I know the run stats right now don't really set it up, but if you can't put it on those guys, I think they're doing a great job.
I like that he starts that quote with, we ask a lot of those guys, because I asked Leonard Williams before the opener or something about the defense, and he just kind of starts laughing. And he's like, sorry, I'm laughing, because he was just like, he was like, not that he was like overrun by it, but he was just wondering like how much it is, like all the different things they're having to do. and then just, what they're asking them to do in terms of what he said with the run game and kind of how it's an unselfish job. They got a lot of talent up front, and we've seen flashes from a lot of guys. I think Leonard Williams is playing about as well as anybody up there. So the run numbers need to get better. Obviously, you can't give up 185, but there's a lot to like about what they're doing.
Yeah, I also think you're going to see it schemed up just a little bit differently this week because we knew that New England was going to double team that inside gap. And Jonathan Hankins said that was about 80% of the time he was dealing with double teams. I don't think you're going to see that with Miami.
No, very different style. They'll still try to run the ball, but they're going to attack the edges a lot more. They're going to test how you can contain the perimeter and try to use their speed. So different challenge. It'll be fun to see how Seahawks handle it.
Oh, and it's going to be so fun to see how the Seahawks handle Miami's defense. But before we dive into that, let's get a word from our presenting sponsor.
Statistically, the world is losing color. Just consider all-white kitchens, beige baby nurseries, a sea of gray cars. But in the hundreds of destinations Delta flies to, you can rediscover color in the bright blue waters of Hawaii, the emerald green hills of Scotland, the berry pink cherry blossoms of Tokyo, and so much more. Sometimes opening your world is all it takes to open your mind, which is why when you fly Delta, your potential takes off when you do. Delta, official airline of the Seattle Seahawks.
I don't know which part of this game and the matchup I am looking forward to most. Do I want to see Miami's offense against Seattle's defense or vice versa? Because this defense should look pretty similar to the Seahawks defense and for good reason.
Yeah, their defensive coordinator is a guy who worked with Mike McDaniel in Baltimore. So it's, as Mike said, it's not a carbon copy. Every time a coach leaves and goes somewhere, just like Mike McDaniel didn't just copy Shanahan's offense, but there's a lot of elements of it. So we've heard from a few players. It looks similar. It's going to look, like what they see in practice, and you'd hope that helped prepare for it.
I would think just the awareness of where the pressure could come from, what those formations could look like. And let's be very clear. Anytime you are preparing for an opponent, there is a scout team that is executing what your opponent should be doing. It is very different, however, if that scout team is trying to mimic a defense like what Miami's going to run one time or once every 4 weeks or twice a year versus, that's just kind of what you're going to see every day in practice. Like your eyes get trained to look for that. I would think your sense of awareness is heightened and nothing is going to feel like it is overwhelming on Sunday.
And you're also, to your point, you're getting a better look from the scout team because they're going to be able to run it better because it's what they know. And that's going to be kind of a common theme we see a lot this season because that defense is, just like we saw with Pete's defense a decade ago. Once something becomes popular and trendy, the league starts adapting and those coaches start getting snapped up. So there's quite a few teams around the NFL running some variant of the Baltimore scheme Mike McDaniel helped build.
And when you talk about the offensive numbers, it is easy to kind of overlook the playmakers on defense. So Jackson Smith and Jigba threw out a first pitch at T-Mobile Park this week, and we were chatting before the first pitch.
It was a strike.
It was a strike. He did a great job. He'd been challenged by his wide receiver teammates who had already thrown out a first pitch. I believe that was Jake Bobo and DK Metcalf. They had, some friendly ribbing on the line and some bragging rights. And it was before I'd really started diving into the matchup, and I was like, well, who does Miami have on defense? And the first name that came to mind was Jalen Ramsey. And
it wasn't Jordan Brooks?
Oh, yeah, it was Jalen Ramsey. And then you start looking at, you're like, okay, but then you've got Jordan Poyer, who came over from Buffalo. You've got Calais Campbell, who knows the Seahawks very well after facing them a number of times in the division. You also have Jordan Brooks, who's got 10 tackles through a couple of games. Like, I think you forget to look at the plays that they make on that side of the ball because the offense is so prolific.
On the offense, there's playmakers over there. You mentioned Jalen Ramsey. That's going to be a really fun one. Going back to his days with the Rams, the Ramsey DK battles have always been fun, and I think we'll see plenty of those too. It's kind of been interesting for DK. Like the first couple games have been a lot of getting shadowed by teams' top guys versus just you're on this side of the field, this guy covers you. He's seen a lot of teams' top corners so far.
We have also seen DK get wide open, and part of that, I think, it is absolutely DK doing what he does, but he's lining up all over the field.
Yeah,
and we talked about this a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
It is paying off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and the way they're using him in different ways, and Ryan Grubb's getting really good at finding ways to kind of put pressure with the looks he does. They've done some up tempo, like the big touchdown that DK had. They were moving fast at that point, and I think because he moves over to that side of the field, and they showed a pressure look where they didn't have safety help, and two guys both thought the other guy had DK, and he just ran by both of them. They actually almost hit that another time, but unfortunately Geno got hit as he threw, so it kind of fluttered incomplete. But there's another one where he was running free, and I think it was the second quarter.
Yeah, and you talk about Geno getting hit. I think one of the biggest question marks would be the offensive line right now, and also the run game. And I talked to Charles Cross this week, and he was just kind of asking, is there something more? Is there nuance? And he was like, look, it takes time to build chemistry on the offensive line. Yeah. That interior is all new. Yeah. And they spend time together. They're going out to dinner together. They're watching film together. They talk about it. He goes, just give it a couple of more weeks. We're working on it, but it really does take knowing the guy next to you with the level of familiarity as a best friend for this to all work up front.
Yeah, and we talked about this, I think, last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, but your center's been here a month. That's probably, left tackle is like the most important position in terms of he gets paid the most, he's protecting the quarterback. But in terms of the biggest challenge of working with everyone else, you're calling the protections, you got to be in lockstep with everybody around you. That center spot is a big challenge. And they went out and got Connor Williams, and I think he signed August 11th, and then he didn't practice for another week after that. So he's been on the field with this team less than a month. So, we talked to him yesterday, and he basically said, like, Mike McDonald's praising him, saying, what he's done has been really impressive. And he's like, well, no, it's not up to my standard. I know I need to get better. And he feels like he's getting there each week, both physically and getting to know his guys. So, yeah, no one on that line is going to say it's been good enough for 2 weeks. They've done some things well, but as a whole, there's, they haven't run the ball consistently. There's been too much pressure. But I think there's a lot of reasons to believe as that unit starts to gel, and then hopefully you eventually get healthier at right tackle, that group should be, trending the right direction these next few weeks.
Yeah, there's a couple of things to keep in mind with that. First of all, you didn't have Ken Walker last game, and you've got a lengthy injury report going into this week's game. So not quite sure who's going to be there and who's not. Week one, it was 146 rushing yards. Again, that's with Walker going over 100. Last week, it was Zach Charbonnet getting most of the carries. It was 46 rushing yards, just 19 total rushing plays. Again, I think part of that is taking what the defense gives you, because New England was selling out on both sides of the ball to both run it and then to stop the run.
Yeah.
This week, Miami is going to blitz a lot. That is one of the biggest differences between Mike McDonald's defense and Anthony Weaver's defense. Miami's blitzing over 31% of the time. That's like top 6 in the league. So you're going to want a little bit more of a balanced attack to make sure that stays in check.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it'd be great if Ken Walker can be back, but if he's not, they're going to lean on Charbonnet again. And one thing I'll say about those rushing numbers, I think, we haven't heard from Ryan Grubb yet this week, but when we do, I'd be willing to bet if he would almost consider maybe 5 or 6 of the completions to Jackson Smith and Jigbo run plays. Like they were essentially,
they functioned as,
that was sort of the extension of their running games. Like, okay, we're not getting this going. Well, we're going to do is quick, boom, get the ball out and let Jackson Smith and Jigbo get. I mean, sometimes it's only 3, 4, 5 yards, but that's a first down run play. So, even though the numbers looked really imbalanced, that was sort of how they were getting around that.
Yeah, and I would also add this. While the numbers aren't where you want it to be and that chemistry is building, the Seahawks are not panicked in calling plays at the line of scrimmage. Like, they are up there. They're able to audible or check into whatever they need to because, they're up and they're set.
Yeah.
With still 15 seconds on the play clock.
Yeah, no, there's been a few times where Gino's spending a lot of time adjusting the line, and I'm thinking, shoot, are they?
I know, I keep looking at the play clock. I'm
it's
like,
oh, he's got 6 seconds.
Yeah.
No, that's been a really nice feature of what Ryan Grubb's doing. He's like, they're getting the line so fast that it gives Gino a lot of time to do what he needs to do. I mean, some of the best plays he made, if you watch the replays, there's the third down shot over the middle to JSN that's been replayed a bunch on Twitter because it's such a good throw. Like he gets up the line, he changes the protection. It looks like he changed the call. You never know for sure what's going on in the headset, but and then still has plenty of time to do that and make a great play.
Well, and DK said that before the season started. It's like the way that he wants you to get to the line of scrimmage on first and second down is to force the issue. Yeah. Like that is Ryan Grubb's style. He wants you to take that ball with intention and take the ball, not just snap the ball. Yeah. If that makes sense. And now I think we know what that actually looks like.
That puts a lot of strain on defense when they're they can't just sit back and expect to know what's coming. It's like this offense is.
It's active.
Yeah.
It's there. I hope that those of you playing fantasy football have a way to catch your defenses off guard. I don't play, so I can't offer you any advice. But you know who can? That would be our fantasy insider, Scott Engel.
What a segue.
Thanks, Jen and John. We get into week 3 of fantasy football, dealing with a lot of injuries. And one of the top plugins is Zach Charbonnet of the Seahawks. Miami is allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to running backs, and he's aiming to open the season with a touchdown from scrimmage in a 3rd consecutive game. If you picked up one of those Kansas City running backs this week, Samaje Perine or Carson Steele, you can use him as an RB3 or a flex because they play in that Chiefs offense. A good amount of points is always possible. I like the Cincinnati Bengals. They have the 6th best run blocking grade for week 3 on Pro Football Focus as they face the Washington Commanders. The Commanders have also allowed the most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks after 2 weeks, so Joe Burrow is a must start. At wide receiver, I'm focusing on that 49ers and Rams matchup in the NFC West. Juwan Jennings has to play a bigger role with the 49ers because of their injuries. And if you're getting to the point where you got to dig deep at wide receiver, Tutu Atwell of the Rams had 3 15-point games fantasy-wise to open the 2023 season. For more detailed analysis, check out the Fantasy Insider tab at the news page on Seahawks.com or check out my work at rotoballer.com and The Athletic. Back to you for week 3 with Dolphins Seahawks, Jen and John.
All right, thank you, Scott. Maybe one day I will end up playing fantasy football. I feel like I've just got so many things out. It's not. I just can't.
It's hard. It's a big commitment.
It's a big commitment, and I can't commit right now. Apparently, is my issue, which is going to make this
sounds like something that's a little beyond this podcast.
Which is going to make this real interesting, John. When I ask you to commit to 2 things that you need to see this week for a Seahawks win.
All right, I need to see. Let's limit the explosive plays Miami gets. Let's keep it under, let's say, no more than 4 plays over 20 yards. Can we do that?
Okay. I was going to say 25 yards was going to be my max.
I'm getting, I'm going 20. And then I want to see the run game, whether it's Walker being back or if Charbonnet does it. They showed literally last week, you don't need to run the ball a bunch for this offense to function. But, boy, it'll be a lot easier, especially if they're bringing pressure, if you can run the ball. So, let's call it 100 rushing yards.
Yeah. I would like to see time of possession even out just a little bit more. It feels like it's been out of whack the last couple of games. I guess it evened out in the end, but there were stretches in the third quarter last week where, the defense needed a bit of a break. The offense needed to stay on the field. So let's keep that even throughout the game because that's where you're going to get the most pressure on Skyler Thompson. Since there was so much on the ground last week, I would love for Miami to put the ball in the air and for our DBs to have at least 3 passes knocked down.
Oh, I thought you were going to say interceptions. Get greedy, Jen.
Maybe 2 interceptions, but I'd like to see at least 3 passes knocked down. I think our coverage has been pretty good when given the opportunity, and see if that can frustrate the young quarterback.
I like it.
Okay, I've committed to that. And you know what else I'm going to commit to? Coming back next week for another edition of the Seahawks Insiders Podcast.